Hi everyone, welcome to the Panhandle Research and Technology Tour Plus, hosted by the Panhandle Research and Extension Center in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. This event was recorded on December 3rd, 2020.
So we're going to get started with Bhajesh Maharjan. Bhajesh is our soil and nutrient management specialist here at the Panhandle, Nebraska. And without further ado, I'll let him get going. If you have any questions.
Hi, thanks for joining this session on soil and nutrient management. I am Bhajesh Maharjan, Soil and Nutrient Management Specialist at UNL Panhandle Research and Extension Center. Today I'll cover this year's nutrient management work on sugar beet and briefly on dry bean and corn as well. And when it comes to nutrient input, this is exactly what we don't want. This is the picture. An extension educator make an effort to illustrate what we ought not to do with our nutrients. This is not photoshopped picture. This is a real picture illustrating if we don't manage it properly, most of our nutrient input may just go down the drain. That's why it's so important, among many other things, we also manage our nutrients properly. Over the years, university researchers and others have put in tremendous effort in order to determine the nutrient recommendation, primarily NPK. As you would see here, there are 3 recommendations for sugar beet, corn, and dry bean each. And some of the things that is common across is the yield goal, as in the case of sugar beet and corn. So yield goal is accounted for heavily when it comes to nitrogen recommendation. Then OM, organic matter. Some of the organic nitrogen also gets mineralized during the growing season and becomes available for crop to uptake. And RSN, the residual soil nitrogen from the previous crop, also needs to be accounted when it comes to nitrogen recommendation. So most of our nitrogen recommendation algorithm is pretty much a function of what is an anticipated yield and then minus the nitrogen credits. Either it may be coming from organic matter or residual carryover nitrogen or any other credits such as legumes. When it comes to dry bean, we don't have such elaborate algorithm as we do have for sugar beet and corn. In dry bean, it being leguminous, we pretty much base much of our nitrogen recommendation on the carryover nitrogen. If residual nitrogen when we prepare to plant dry bean is over 100 pounds, then we ought not to put any nitrogen. This is an illustration of what happens to mineral nitrogen once it's applied to the soil. Our nitrogen fertilizer may be urea-based or ammonia-based. Once urea-based fertilizer is applied, it's get hydrolyzed and converted to ammonium. Ammonium is one of the 2 forms of nitrogen that plant would like to uptake. Ammonium in the soil, given favorable conditions, will convert to nitrate. In the process, it goes to nitrite and then further to nitrate. But the problem with this mineral nitrogen, reactive mineral nitrogen, is that ammonium in its abundance in the soil, given favorable conditions such as dryness, high pH, it can be volatilized to atmosphere as ammonia gas. Same way, the issue with nitrate form of nitrogen is that it's very, very soluble in water, and thereby whenever there is a high influx of water, either via irrigation or rainstorm, that nitrate gradually moves down the soil profile along with water and may leach away from the reach of the crop roots. And that nitrate can be a big issue since it contaminates the groundwater. In this whole process, some of the nitrogen can also emit from the soil as greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas, and agriculture is called upon to reduce that emission. And here you have some other more blocks to showcase the new or recently developed fertilizer nitrogen technologies. One is polymer coating. Some of the dry granules are covered with polymers, and thereby it allows the dry fertilizer to be released from that coating gradually as a function of soil moisture and temperature. Thereby, the sustained presence of nitrogen may be available for crop during the growth season to uptake. Another technology is inhibitor, urease inhibitor, that slows the conversion of urea to ammonium. And the third technology is nitrification inhibitor, that chemically inhibits the conversion of ammonium to further down to nitrate. So all these three technologies, polymer coating, which inhibits the release of nitrogen to the soil physically, and chemical inhibitors, urease and nitrification, slows down the conversion of nitrogen from urea to ammonium to further down to nitrate. So by these technologies, we attempt to keep the presence of nitrogen a little sustained throughout the growing season, so that before it can be lost to environment, plant will have access to it during its growth period and uptake it, and hopefully it will increase the efficiency of nitrogen use in crop. Let's begin with the fertility trial on sugar beet. This year we initiated a field trial in order to evaluate sugar beet response to fertilizer nitrogen. We also would try to estimate optimum nitrogen rate for maximum beet yield as well as maximum sucrose yield. As we manage nitrogen input, we need to be aware that more than half of our nitrogen input may be lost to environment, primarily via leaching. So we are also managing these nitrogen in order to reduce the leaching. That's also part of our trial to evaluate how different management affects nitrogen leaching. We are also attempting to see if we can potentially use crop sensor in order to manage nitrogen in sugar beet. And then there is another issue that we are addressing in this trial, and that is beet topsoil flume. It's the soil that adheres to the root when we harvest and when we bring it to the factory. So the root is also bringing in some of your topsoil, which can be loaded with nitrogen. So we are also evaluating how we can manage our nitrogen properly to reduce that beet topsoil flume. So as I said before, BTF, beet topsoil flume, is the soil that comes to factory along with the root that truck to the factory for processing. And apparently over time, over a lot of acreages, the root comes from this nitrogen loading in that little soil that comes with the root can become pretty cumulative and significant. Here we have 12 different nitrogen treatments. First 5 are different rates of urea, all applied at planting, all the way from 0 to 212 pounds. 170 pounds was the end recommended based on the current algorithm we have for sugar beet, where we account for a yield goal of 30 tons per acre, and also the residual nitrogen, which was pretty low here in this field, about 10 pounds in the top 4 feet. And then we also had split applied urea treatment, treatment number 6 through 8, where we took 100% of recommended rate, which is 170 pounds of nitrogen, and split it 30-70 top dress on July 1st, 50-50, 50 at planting, 50% at on July 1st, and 80-20 bulk at planting, and then 20% of 170 pound on July 1st. And then we had also those new technologies that we mentioned in the last slide, PCU, polymer coated urea. This is the dry granule urea with coating. I have two rates, 80% and 100% of recommended N rate, which comes out to be 135 and 170 pounds applied at planting. And at the same rate, another technology, which is urea with chemical inhibitors, both urease and nitrification inhibitors. PCU we used, it's a duration, and inhibitor is Uflex. Both products are from Nutrien. And on the left you can see an aerial picture taken soon after split application, the top dressing, which was on July 1st. Something that stands out pretty clear is treatment number 1, which is control, and I have circled it with the yellow lines. You can see poor vegetative growth compared to rest of the treatment plots. Here, this is the figure yield data, yield response to urea nitrogen rates. So we have a nitrogen ramp rates considered here are 0 nitrogen, 86 pounds per acre nitrogen, 135, 170, and 212 pounds of nitrogen. And when we regress the yield data against this nitrogen rate, the yield response fit in very well. The quadratic plateau regression model fit in very well in this yield response data. And this model suggests that root yield plateaued at about 110 pounds of nitrogen rate with the corresponding root yield of about 29 tons per acre. And here is a plot of nitrogen treatment comparison in terms of root yield. This comparison includes treatments that has 80, 100, and 125% of recommended N rate as urea applied at planting, 100% urea applied as split, 30-70, 50-50, 80-20 at planting and on July 1st, and also are included 80 and 100% of nitrogen rate applied as polymer coated urea or urea with inhibitors at planting. As you see in the figure, there's quite a bit of variability. Overall, the probability that the mean values of these yield by different treatments being different is low. And just to keep in mind that this is a single site year data, we will evaluate these treatments again in next year. This is the result for sugar concentration in tubers by different nitrogen treatments. As you can see, the first bar is for the control treatment, which received no nitrogen, and it seems to have a little higher sugar concentration than some other nitrogen treatments, such as highest urea rate, the split applied urea, as well as some inhibitor and PCU treatments. And as we know, with sugar beet production, it's pretty tricky with the nitrogen effects on yield, and sometimes higher the rate of nitrogen or the late supply of nitrogen can adversely affect the sugar concentration. But overall, all the nitrogen treatments achieved around 18% sugar concentration this year. This is a plot pertaining to BTF, beet topsoil flume. We collected top 1 foot soil throughout the growing season starting from July 8. As you can see over the time, the top foot soil mineral nitrogen value goes down on July 8, which was soon after the top dressing, which happened on July 1st, and therefore some of the split nitrogen treatment has considerably higher nitrogen in the top foot soil. But over the period of the season, almost all the nitrogen treatment values goes down. On the October 7th, which is a day or two after the harvest, the nitrogen value in the topsoil ranged somewhere from 5 to 17 parts per million. If we look closely at that last soil sampling, we do see some differences among nitrogen treatments with respect to nitrogen in the topfoot soil. However, still nitrate value ranges from somewhere 5 to 11 parts per million for most of the nitrogen treatments. So this probably underscores that even in the control we do have about 5 ppm. So this underscores that this would be it when it comes to beet flume. The nitrogen value will be, even when you manage the nitrogen well, the value would still be somewhere between single digit to low tens. If your soil has more than low tens, then probably we can do something to optimize nitrogen management in order to reduce the nitrate value in the topfoot soil during harvest. But otherwise, this will be anticipated that nitrate value will be somewhere single digit to low tens when tubers are harvested for processes. Therefore, we might have to think something different if we need to really lower this nitrate value in the topsoil when we harvest sugar beet. So in summary, we learned this year that the beet yield plateaued at about 110 pounds of nitrogen per acre with corresponding yield of 29 tons per acre. Technologies such as polymer-coated urea or urea with inhibitors didn't improve yield or sugar content. Having said that, we still have to analyze leaching loss of nitrogen data. So as we saw in the case of topsoil nitrogen, how it was much higher with the polymer-coated urea treatment compared to urea granules. That suggests to me that maybe some of the balance of nitrogen in the urea treatment compared to PCU treatment might have been lost. So there can still be benefit of using this advanced technology since it sustains the nitrogen availability longer, thereby reduces the environmental loss potential. And we also yet to analyze the crop sensor data that would help us to determine if there is a potential for use of crop sensing in nitrogen management for beet production. And of course, we also learned as we were addressing this beet topsoil flume issue that somewhere up to low 10 ppm value of nitrogen is anticipated when the beet roots are delivered to the factory. We might have to consider other ways how we can mine that residual nitrogen in the beet topsoil flume. I also shared a bit on dry bean fertility trial that I have done this year during the field day tour. I don't have an update here yet, but just to inform you, we did a fertility trial where we used different urea rates, the N rate RAMS 0 to 100 pounds at planting, as well as split urea treatment and late application treatments. In total, 12 different nitrogen treatments were evaluated for bean production this year. An interesting observation, or maybe obvious observation, during the season, we noticed how the root nodulation were much higher with the low nitrogen input. The control treatment, which received no nitrogen at all, had the biggest nodulation density and more pinkish, showing the more active nodulation in terms of different nitrogen treatments. Higher the nitrogen rates, we could notice more root hairs and less nodules. I'll have a full report on that bean trial when we will present at Bean Day soon. And one exciting news on bean trial is we were awarded USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant for next 2 years, where I'll be collaborating with the Carlos Uria and Kaustubh Mazumdar, food scientists at UNL, to identify the best nitrogen as well as iron management systems to produce high-value bean in western Nebraska. This year, I also have had a corn trial where this is industry-sponsored trial where I evaluated the use of chemical inhibitors. This is from Koch Industries for liquid nitrogen. Since this is an industry trial, so I'll have to first report it to industry, and then with their permission, I'll be able to share some of the results with all of you. With that brief information on corn and bean fertility trial, I'll stop here and would be glad to respond to any questions that you may have. Thank you for your attendance and attention.
Thank you, Bajesh. Please enter any questions you may have in the chat box. We've got a few minutes here to answer questions. And if we don't get anything, I've got some questions for Bajesh, so I'm curious about a couple of things.
Sure, Nevin, thank you. And thank you all for joining the session early in the morning.
Jeff asked a question. I was wondering, what was the last picture of besides a picnic in your conclusion slide?
Right, so that's the picture by courtesy of David Ostick. I've got it. He got into some of the old collection of our pictures from the center. So that's one of the pictures of field day. Apparently those days more family visited our center for the field tour, and they are having a lunch in that picture.
Still an important part of field days to this day. I have a question. So you were showing that the encapsulated or coated nitrogen fertilization in the sugar beets wasn't improving yield any, but you haven't looked at you have yet to analyze the nitrogen loss information. I'm guessing if yield didn't increase, but loss of nitrogen decrease, that would still be a positive. Have you seen any evidence that that's the encapsulated or coated nitrogen sources providing less loss?
Thank you, Nevin. Yes, so during my grad school years and even here in the Panhandle last year, we did see the benefit of adding this new technology, polymer or inhibitors, nitrogen, and we did notice reduced leaching loss in the corn. But for sugar beet, it's tricky because I would assume most likely we will see reduced leaching with these fertilizer formulations. But the problem is these technologies are built in order to keep the sustained supply of nitrogen throughout the season. And as you know, for sugar beet, that's not exactly what we need. A rule of thumb is somewhere 5 or 6 weeks before the harvest, we would like to see nitrogen is depleted in the soil, thereby it doesn't mess up with our sugar content in the beet. So it's a tricky, I mean, we might have to think of other different ways to manage nutrients in order to achieve sustainability goal. But as a researcher, that's still a question. How would you deal with this trade-off? These technologies may reduce the environmental nutrient losses, but might not benefit much with the yield or sugar. So that would be questions that we all will need to discuss and decide on.
Speaking of sugar, was there, you had I think the root yield there. Was there any changes in the sugar yield or sugar purity?
Yes, if you allow me, I can share one more plot. Of course, we did this video some time ago, so I have a little more data. I can share. This is sugar loss to molasses. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Yeah, so on your y-axis, we have a percentage of SLM and regress against urea rates. So pretty linear, significant, strong linear response of sugar loss to applied urea rates. It goes somewhere from 1 to 1.3. I don't exactly know what would be the optimal LSM. SLM, of course, 0 will be nice, but still. So nitrogen compound, solubilized nitrogen compound in sugar really makes it difficult to be during the juice purification. That nitrogen stays and therefore contributes towards molasses. So higher the rates of urea applied, we see the higher the rates of SLM. If you would recall, the optimal nitrogen rate we found from the yield response was about 110 pounds. If you plot that 110 pounds on this figure, the SLM would be somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2. I think that would be still an acceptable number. So yes, higher the rates, root yield may be increased, but then it can negatively affect sugar content or sugar loss to molasses.
What was the sugar content differences between nitrogen rates, not just the SLM?
Sugar rate was more or less all the treatments had a little over 18%.
Do you see any reasons yet from your research that you might be wanting to update the recommendations for either sugar beet or dry bean fertility for nitrogen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's what my attempt is at. Some of our recommendation hasn't been revised for some time. For example, dry bean fertility trial, fertility recommendation. I think last it was revised was 2013. And again, not based on, field trials. So, and same for sugar beet. It hasn't been revised for quite some time. So we are trying to at least gather database first to inform ourselves well, so that if needed, we would like to revisit the recommendation. Sure. So for some for example, in sugar beet, right now it used to be something like 9 pounds per tonnage. That's what was recommended. Of course, on top of that, we have to consider for nitrogen credits from residual nitrogen or organic matter. Then it got revised down to 8 pounds per tonnage. But this first year data shows it's even lower than 8. So of course, I don't want to really deduce the conclusion here, but it's just the first site here. But we need to continue, and with the improved cultivar, who knows, right? I mean, some of the uptake efficiency might have been also enhanced. So we need to do a little more research before we can get to the revision.
Thank you. Are you, besides nitrogen, are you working on any other nutrient issues in any of the crops here in the Panhandle?
Other nutrients, I haven't got to the micronutrients that much. Starting next year, we will have some iron study on dry beans. Gary Hergood, who's my predecessor, he had done some iron work primarily for chlorosis problem. But this time we are doing iron work primarily for the bean quality. We heard from our producers that at times Nebraska bean quality is little lower than, let's say, Michigan beans. Our iron content seems to be little, has room to improvement. So we are going to do some iron work on dry beans. Let me think. Of course, we have different types of other sources, trial or the biological work going on. Winter wheat, we plan to start some micronutrient works. There are a lot of questions on sulfur, chloride, even zinc. We might do some of those work.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the other panelists or attendees before we move to a break for the next speaker to get ready? And do you have anything else to add, Rajesh? Do you like people to know?
Hey, I have more update on other stuff, but I think I'll be seeing many of you during the Bean reporting maybe or Bean Day. As of now, I do have some updates on Bean data as well, but you can always reach to me easily by phone or email, and I would love to chat if you have any more questions on fertility or soil regarding questions. So you are most welcome to give me a call, email as you feel.
All right, thank you. With that, I think we'll move to break